What's up everyone, Alex here. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is finally coming out on PC, and while it's always cool to see games running at the highest quality possible, I know that a good portion of you play on portables, as it's the best way to play games when you've got tons of responsibilities. Hashtag relatable. So imagine my surprise when Digital Foundry wrote an article that talked about the game's performance on Steam Deck. And to the surprise of no one, of course, Digital Foundry recommends everybody play it on a more powerful PC. I mean, duh, the Steam Deck is an underpowered piece of hardware. That's like saying I want this Geo Metro to perform like a freaking Lamborghini. Not that I'm saying the Steam Deck is a Geo Metro, by the way. There's like no amount of optimization, especially with the amount of detail and post-processing that Final Fantasy VII does, can make it truly run on the platform without having too many compromises. And so I want to be clear here by saying that even before this article came out, I'd always intended on playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on Steam Deck, because like I said, a lot of you will be playing it. And of course, here's my review of it. Because I've already made a comprehensive review of the game last year, I'll be sharing a brief version of my opinions in this video. But if you need a more detailed review of the game itself, I highly recommend watching that video after this one, which I'm linking in the description. Thanks to Square Enix for providing me with this PC game code. So I'm kinda thinking let's talk about the performance of the game on Steam Deck and get that out of the way, because I have a feeling that you'll want to know what kind of compromises this game had in order to make it run on this platform. And I want to be clear by saying I'm not Digital Foundry, far from it. But as somebody who 100%ed the first area of the game and of course finished Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I'll at least share things that I personally noticed. Like things that you'll easily find even if you're not looking for its imperfections. I think the first thing you'll see, apart from the lower resolution and texture quality, is the motion blurring that was also present in the PS5 version. Now I get that motion blurring is typically used to smoothen animations, but its effect on the game's visual quality is a bit more obvious here, because of the lower resolution. You'll notice this whenever you're looking at a character's hair, after the scene changes to a character that's mostly stationary. It starts off looking a bit dithered first, then, shortly after, you start to see the finer details appear. Besides, who doesn't notice Cloud or Sephiroth's hair? The most noticeable thing, however, is the environmental pop-in, where shrubbery and little details in the environment just appear out of nowhere, with no fade-in or anything to soften its sudden appearance. And along similar lines, rock faces and various curved environmental details load higher fidelity geometry the closer you get to them, and in some cases, really abstracted when far away. Just look at Midgar in this shot. Not that you can recognize it, since it's a jumble of polygons in the distance. There's also texture pop-in too, from time to time, as seen on these windows as Cloud sneaks along these catwalks. With regards to overall framerate performance, I can confirm that the framerate dips in the 20s while in towns, exhibiting strange behavior such as completely stopping any animation of townsfolk if they're rendered beyond a certain distance from you, as seen here. This is usually done to save on processing power, as animations are very spendy due to its complexities. Outside of that, every dungeon and open world section I've played did a really good job of maintaining 30 frames per second, which is what I expected. But ultimately, the real question you probably want answered is whether or not Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is sufficiently playable on the Steam Deck, to which my answer is yes, even though it's not ideal. Playing a game that demands a lot of PC resources on the Steam Deck means that there will be compromises in many places, especially with something rendering huge expansive environments like in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And given that the frame rate holds up well in areas where there's fighting, I'd say that they did a pretty good job in ensuring that the combat feels great. I also want to mention that if you're watching this on a desktop, its visual quality will definitely appear far worse than seeing it on a small screen rendered at 720p. Here's a short render of gameplay in 720p, to just hammer the point home. Beyond its performance and playability, if you're the type of RPG fan who loves exploring a huge landmass, accomplishing tasks, and learning about pieces of lore and the culture of an area, then you're gonna love Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's world. I won't say how many areas there are in total, but I will say that each of these are massive. The first area alone took me 10 hours to fully 100%, and that's just the beginning. Keep in mind that not all of these activities have the lore and insight into the culture as I mentioned, but they do reward you with a bunch of stuff, like materia, unlocking new crafting recipes, adding nerfs to a fight in the battle simulator, and revealing other activities by climbing a tower a la Assassin's Creed. You'll naturally encounter perils in the form of monsters roaming the world, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth features a faster and more responsive fighting system, as well as an overhauled weapon and progression system that also keeps track of your relationships with your party members. This relationship mechanic comes into play later in the game, and if you played the original, you already know when. There's also a brand new progression system called Folio, which you can easily refund points from at any time should you wish to change how your character is built. All in all, there are a wealth of options to customize your character that doesn't feel too overwhelming, thanks to the specificity of each of these systems and how the aforementioned world activities tie in with these. And now that the combat's even more buttery smooth than ever, coupled with brand new over-the-top tag team attacks, and there's so many more ways to employ strategies and enjoy Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's battles. With regards to the story, a point of contention that some players have had is that the game feels like the world activities prolong what could be completed in a few hours, especially when compared to the original game. What these criticisms miss is the fact that rendering Final Fantasy VII in such a grand scale requires stronger narrative connections due to its relatively realistic depiction. It is true that Final Fantasy VII Remake messed around with what may or may not happen, especially for fans of the original game. However, due to these games' sizes, I now believe that this story element is the developer's way of saying that some stories may have to be omitted in times when you'd expect them, in favor of being able to give their story the time it deserves in a future game. This allows Rebirth's eventual sequel to have more meaningful stories than what was originally featured in Disc 3 of Final Fantasy VII, where you were mainly just building up towards the final showdown with Sephiroth. That said, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth contains some of the most emotional moments in the original game, and for someone who hasn't played the original since its release, it's pretty incredible to just have this wave of emotion come back from the past after experiencing these same scenes rendered with such higher fidelity. This is all to say that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, on any platform, is a must-play for any fan wishing to continue their journey from Final Fantasy VII Remake. It is true that it'll leave you with a lot of questions in the end, but, in my opinion, that's what a good Act 2 in a 3-part act does. And I want to end this video with a couple of closing remarks, slightly altered, that I wrote in my PS5 review. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, with all of its vast improvements, its massive open-world scale, and its familiar yet sometimes diverging story, are just some of the reasons why I named it my Backlog Battle Game of the Year for 2024. And this is one game that I truly can't wait to see you experience for yourself.